Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter. I'm your host, Jonah Malkin, with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for joining me. I am wearing my Dodger blue today in honor of the Dodgers winning their first title since 1988. I'm going to talk about that, what this means for the Dodgers, the perfect culmination to this season. The Rams win a big game against the Bears on Monday Night Football. My top 5 MVPs so far, my top 5 MVP candidates of the NFL season so far. And then got a special guest, Ben Cross, NBC Sports content curator and distributor, and college football insider, is going to join me in about half an hour. And then I've got a great Malkin's Moments for you. So you're going to want to stick around and make sure that you tune in for that. Again, thank you so much for joining me on a lovely Wednesday morning. A lot to get into, and Dodgers win their first National World Series title since 1988. That was the same year the famous Kirk Gibson home run. He pinch hit in the ninth spot, in the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, worked a full count. It was 2 strikes, 3 balls, 2 strikes against Dennis Eckersley, and literally hobbling on 1 foot, hits a walk-off home run in game 1 of the 1988 World Series that the Dodgers ended up winning. Just a special culmination now. And to see this Dodgers team finally pull through, just the perfect coronation for such a dominant team, for such a dominant franchise over the years. And this is special. This is truly special. 1988 not only was the last time that the Dodgers won the World Series, but the Dodgers and the Lakers won the World Series that season. No MLB and NBA combination has ever achieved that. So this is something special. And listen, this is an extremely memorable moment, of course, not only because now this is 6 championships for the LA Dodgers. 1 was won with the Brooklyn Dodgers, so 7 total. But you think back to all these shortcomings. I've talked about this perhaps the last several shows that I've had about 2013 and 2014, the losses to the Cardinals, 2015, the loss to the Mets, 2016, the loss to the Cubs, 2017 in the World Series, the loss to the Houston Astros, 2018, the loss to the Boston Red Sox in the World Series, and then 2019, the loss to the Washington Nationals. And now you finally break through. New ownership came in 2012. They got Magic Johnson on board to turn around this franchise. They brought in Andrew Freeman from Tampa Bay. He's infused this team with some confidence. They've developed players extremely well. They have one of the best minor league systems in the entire MLB. And you just think about all the adversity, all the criticism, all the scrutiny and ridicule that this team, that these players, that this organization has endured, and for it to culminate in 2020 with another World Series title, the first time ending a 32-year drought, is fantastic. And there's so many guys that I want to single out, that I think it's important to single out because they deserve it. They really deserve to be called out right now. I'm so thrilled and happy for Clayton Kershaw. This man, there's nothing ill you can speak about this man. The way he conducts himself, the way he represents himself in the Dodgers organization, the way that he has inspired people within this LA community, how much he's given back to the Los Angeles community. And just for years, this guy his name has been dragged through the mud, that he can't pitch well in the biggest games of the season, that he folds in the postseason. This guy's got a career 2.43 ERA, and in this World Series, he pitched 2 gems, finished with a 2.34 ERA. This guy is really special, and I'm just so happy for him because, again, he's received so much criticism throughout his career, and now finally he breaks through, and you could see that joy permeate through this entire Dodgers organization, and especially it really peered through Dave Roberts and his admiration for Clayton Kershaw and how much he knows that this means to Clayton Kershaw, because Kershaw's been the one guy, the one linchpin throughout this entire run. He's been with the Dodgers organization longer than anyone on the team, and every player understands the magnitude and what this moment means to him. And it's extremely special to see him finally achieve that World Series. And he's one guy. Kenley Jansen is another individual that has been criticized as well for his inability, his shortcomings as a closer. He was kind of stripped of his title as the closer. Blake Trinan came in, and obviously we've seen the postseasons that Kenley Jansen has had. Even though he's played well in many of them, the closing times when he's been inserted into the games, he hasn't always been able to execute. And because of that, to see him finally break through in 8 seasons with the Dodgers, that's extremely fulfilling. Justin Turner, obviously, I'll touch on his positive COVID test at the end, hopefully not overshadowing this tremendous run that this team had. But for him to finally win with the Dodgers, he was like the second or third longest tenured player on the team so far. And for him to finally win one with this organization is tremendous. Dave Roberts was on the hot seat, his 5th season as the general manager, but we know that if he was unable to win a World Series this year, what that would mean for his future. He might have been let go had he not won a World Series last night. Now we scratch that narrative, and you can go on with Bellinger. This is important. Max Muncy, this was important. A guy that they really just picked off the junkyard and gave him an opportunity to flourish and to prosper, and he's taken advantage of it. And then probably the most significant is the Mookie Betts trade. Back in February of last season, February 10th, Andrew Friedman makes the trade for him. And both he and Clayton Kershaw already in this season, and Kershaw obviously throughout his entire career, have left an indelible mark on this franchise. Kershaw obviously has left an indelible mark on this organization, but Mookie Betts is on that path. There aren't too many real game changers, too many real athletes that pop off your screen in baseball. He's one of them. He's a once-in-a-generational type of athlete that's playing in baseball right now. The types of plays that this guy performs, that this guy can do, not only offensively, but more importantly, defensively. I think his defensive will to make all these incredible catches is probably the most memorable part of this postseason run. And you just think back to his impact. I mean, he's had such an impact on this franchise. He was that missing piece, and we know how reticent the Dodgers were to pay some of these players big-time money. They didn't want to give it to Manny Machado. They didn't want to give it to Bryce Harper. But this was a guy that they wanted to give it to. Mookie Betts, 12 years, $365 million deal to finish his career with the Dodgers. And in year one, he wins a World Series for him. In year one, he's able to deliver. And you just think about, obviously throughout the entire postseason, but let's just focus on Game 6, which the Dodgers, by the way, won 3-1 in 6 games, close out the series 4-2. If you think about who made all the impact plays, especially on the offensive side in Game 6, the guy you have to think about is Mookie Betts. He was the only player to play extremely well on offense. Austin Barnes had his moments, and the key inning was the bottom of the 6th. Austin Barnes hits a 1-out single. They pull Blake Snell. I'm going to talk about that. Mookie Betts comes on, advances Barnes with a double to third. The wild pitch from Nick Anderson when he checks in allows Barnes to score. And then a fielder's choice, a ground out, or what should have been a ground out for Corey Seager, allows Seager to advance to first. And Mookie Betts from third does an excellent job running to home, and he slides in safely. And that gave the Dodgers a 2-1 lead. So he hits the double that sets up Barnes to tie the game. Then he slides in to give the Dodgers the lead. And then in the bottom of the eighth, he hits a solo home run to give the Dodgers that extra insurance run. And they go up 3-1. And it's fitting because he started off game 1 of the World Series with a home run, ended game 6 with a home run. And in that closeout game in 2018 with the Red Sox against the Dodgers in game 5, he also hit a home run. So this is a guy that not only his base running is exceptional, but 2 for 4, 1 home run, two runs in game 6. He was fantastic. And again, when you think about the fact that he was a member of the Red Sox organization just in 2018, not too long ago, and now he's a member of the Dodgers. And in that 2018, they faced the Dodgers, and now he's part of the blue and white. And so he's a special player. He's a special player. But again, when Kevin Cash pulled the plug on Blake Snell after pitching a gem, went 5 in about a third inning, had given up just 2 hits, 9 strikeouts, 0 runs, no walks. This guy was dealing. And Kevin Cash pulls him out. And that's what really infused some life into this Dodgers offense, into the bats of the Dodgers, because now they said, okay, now we got him. And Blake Snell was pitching exceptionally well. Understandably, he was frustrated at the end of the game and in the post-game conference. And that was a huge moment. And then you look at Corey Seager and the fact that Corey Seager won the World Series MVP, and he was also the NLCS MVP. I mean, in the World Series, he batted over 400 with 2 home runs, 5 RBIs, and 6 walks. The only other guy to win the NLCS and the World Series MVP for the Dodgers was in 1988, and it was Orel Hershiser, the talented Dodgers pitcher. The last time that a player on one team has won the NLCS and the World Series MVP was Madison Bumgarner with the Giants in 2014. And there have only been 8 players to have achieved such a record, and they've all come from the NL. So Corey Seager was masterful this entire postseason. 344 batting average, 8 home runs, 19 RBIs. People forgot when this guy had Tommy John surgery, they thought he was just going to fall off the face of the earth. No, he's right here. Just a really talented guy. And just, again, the adversity that these guys have had to go through to play in this bubble, to be dealing with the pandemic, is nothing short of spectacular. Nothing short of spectacular. And again, this entire year, 2020, the last time the Dodgers won the title, 1988, the Lakers won a title. As I mentioned earlier, no other combination of NBA and MLB teams have won in the same year. Last time it happened was 1988, and that was with the Dodgers. And now they're both champions. And this is just 16 days after the Lakers won the championship in Orlando. 16 days after, and now the Dodgers win another one. This city should no longer be referred to as the City of Angels, but the City of Champions. This is the mecca of sports right now in Los Angeles. And it's fitting in such a turbulent year, such a turbulent time, a tumultuous time for everyone. In a year filled with so much sorrow and despair comes another beacon of hope and beam of light in the city of Los Angeles. This is extremely special. And there's something about game 6s this year for the Lakers And the Dodgers, that's what it takes to close out these teams from Florida. It takes 6 games. This is special for Vince Scully, the longtime play-by-play announcer for the Dodgers. Had a 67-year career, was with the team for so long, retired in 2016, and now got to see the team pull through. This is a special moment for him. He tweeted after the game. And now it's a shame that Justin Turner ended up testing positive midway through the game, which is why they pulled him to start the 8th. And listen, it was very controversial that they let him back out onto the field to celebrate. I don't know what the right course of action was, but I can tell you for sure it's hard to tell a guy like that, hey, stay away from the field. Don't celebrate with us when you've been such an integral part of the team, when you've contributed so much, when you've poured your heart and soul into this game, into this franchise, and to not be able to see it through and reap the benefits and rewards and be told to sit on the side. That's a hard decision to make. That's a hard thing to tell a guy when he's been so vital to your team's success for so long. So I don't blame the Dodgers for, if you want to say, not having the stones to tell Justin Turner not to come back, or to rather to stay isolated like that. It's tough to do. And, he insisted that he could celebrate, and the team said, sure. And again, the city's just been grieving and mourning with the loss of the icon in Kobe Bryant. And you throw another wrench into it all with COVID and the pandemic. And yet this team just continued to show tremendous resolve and fighting spirit. And it's extremely special. It's extremely special. So congratulations to the Dodgers. Congratulations to the city of Los Angeles, where I am from. This is an extremely special moment. I'm extremely proud to be in Los Angeles right now. And again, we're not going to be referred to as the City of Angels anymore. We'll be referred to as the City of Champions. And let's make sure that it stays that way. So coming up, I'm going to talk about the Rams and the Bears, and got my top 5 NFL MVPs coming up very shortly. Again, Morning Joe right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network, on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter, Mondays and Wednesdays from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Josh Lewis, this Jonah Malkin guy, knows what he's talking about. Hashtag champs. Shout out to Josh Lewis all the way in Israel. Thank you, my guy. I appreciate it. Hope you're staying safe over there. Appreciate you tuning in all the way in Israel. That's Josh Lewis. Shout out to him. Okay. So, MVP, we're going to get into in just a moment. Rams beat the Bears 24-10 on Monday Night Football. I don't want to hear all this talk about Jared Goff isn't good. Now, I'm not going to make the claim right here that he's an MVP right now. He's a top 10 quarterback, about a top 11, top 10 quarterback. But for a Sean McVay team, that's successful. That's what you need. That's what you need. Jared Goff was very solid, 22 of 33, over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over. This was a must-win, in my opinion, for the Rams. You look at their division in the NFC West, you've got the Seahawks at number 1, atop the division at 5-1. Cardinals are 5-2. The Rams were 4-2. Now they're 5-2 to tie the Cardinals for second. And then the 49ers, who beat the Rams, are 4-3. The worst team in the division is 4-3. The Dodgers absolutely needed to win this game. The Bears are going to be a wild card contender along with them, because the Packers right now, with that loss, moved ahead of them in the NFC North. So the Bears are 5-2, and the Saints are 4-2. Really, the Bears and the Saints and whoever else out of the NFC that's not in first place, they're all competing for those last spots, because Tampa Bay is atop the NFC South. The NFC East is going to have someone, just one, but they're going to have some representative. And then the NFC West will likely have 3 teams come out of that division. So this was a huge win against a potential wild card foe who you're comparing yourself to in the Chicago Bears. But what I love about the Rams right now is, yes, Jared Goff has been playing well, over 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Okay, he's playing solid. He's playing what he needs to do. He's keeping this offense balanced, and that's what I love. This offense is so balanced. It's unbelievable how much they keep these defenses guessing. 7 different receivers have had multiple touchdowns this season, so they're spreading the love. They're getting different guys involved, and this is an offense that is extremely efficient. They utilize the run game. They're a top 10 run team in the entire NFL, 7th, 139 rushing yards per game. Their offensive line is healthy. And as I mentioned, they run the football extremely well. Malcolm Brown, Darrell Henderson, those 2 guys combined for over 100 yards a couple days ago. And then their top 10 offense in total yards in the league. And you couple that with how nasty now their defense is playing. This defense is electric. They jumped off the screen a couple nights ago. I mean, this is a top 10 defense in every single category. They're top 5 against the rush, top 5 in pass defense, top 6 in opposing receiving yards. They're number 3 in total sacks so far this season with 24. Aaron Donald has been a monster. 2nd in the NFL in sacks with 8, just behind Myles Garrett with 9. Like this defense gets after it. And then you got Jalen Ramsey making highlight tackles right at the first down marker like we're seeing. He's been playing extremely well, and he's a lockdown corner, and he's been playing like it. Not to mention, they held the Bears to 3 points through the first 3 quarters. This is a team that in now 7 games have held opponents to under 18 points a game. That's second best in the NFL behind the Ravens. In their last 3 games, they've limited teams to 14.7 points per game over the last 3 games. So this team is starting to find their groove. They're starting to click, but especially defensively is their calling card, and Aaron Donald is making his impact. And I think part of it is that they don't have such a big target on their back anymore. For the last several years, they were the hunted, and now they're kind of getting a chance to just fly quietly under the radar like a reconnaissance drone that's just flying around and no one's really seeing them. And this has allowed this team to flourish. This has allowed this team, because they're not as flashy and glamorous anymore, they don't have the glitzy kind of offense, much more balanced. It's allowed this team to thrive. And they're well coached, they're disciplined, they're versatile, which is really important, and they're super, super deep. The depth on this team at every single position is impressive. Now, I'm not bailing on the Bears. Let's be clear. I'm not bailing on the Bears. They're still 5-2. This is still a good team. Are they good enough to make a wild card spot? Now, I'm not sure. They're certainly going to be fighting for one. But the reason I'm not bailing on them is because of their defense. This is still a top 10 defense. All right, they still get after the quarterback with Khalil Mack, with Danny Trevathan, Hakeem Hicks. They've got a tremendous defense. They're also top 5 in points per game defending. So this Bears team is really good. The problem is they can't run the football. That's their problem. And then you compound that with the ACL tear suffered to Tariq Cohen, and now David Montgomery's got to shoulder that entire load, and he's not capable of doing that. 17 carries, 48 rushing yards against the Rams, but the Bears are the worst rushing team in the NFL, averaging 84 yards per game, and they couldn't even get to 50 on Monday night. Now, that's a credit to the Rams, but that's also kind of an indictment against the Bears, that they just can't run the football. And one of the reasons why Nick Foles was so successful with the Eagles when he came in was because they had such a balanced offensive attack with the running game, and the running game is what set up the play action for him to be so successful. Now, if you remove the play action threat and you just say, okay, we want Nick Foles to drop back 3 to 5 steps, in a protected pocket and get rid of the football, that's not as conducive for a successful Nick Foles. He's got to have a run game to set up the play action for him. He's not talented and athletic enough to be able to make plays just happen out of thin air like that. He's not a Patrick Mahomes. He's not a Lamar Jackson. He's not one of these guys that have tremendous improvisational skills like a Russell Wilson who can just scratch the playbook when plays break down and create something for you. And with no run game, now they're trailing Green Bay in the NFC North. And we're going to learn a lot about the Bears right now in this next stretch of games because they've got a brutal 4-game stretch. They've got the Saints. They've got versus the Saints, at the Titans, versus the Vikings, which they should win, and then at the Packers. So 3 out of those 4 games are against extremely well-coached, good teams with winning records. Now, the Rams also have a brutal stretch after they play the Dolphins, which is Tua's first game, which is going to be interesting. They've got versus the Seahawks, at the Buccaneers, versus the 49ers, and at the Cardinals. So they had to have won that game against the Bears to stay in that race, to stay competitive. This was crucial for them. So, again, I said the Bears and the Saints are probably the only other 2 teams that are competing right now with the Rams and the 49ers for those final couple playoff spots. But we're going to learn a lot more about both of these 2 teams, but this was a really impressive win for the Rams, something that we need to see. Okay, my top 5 NFL MVPs. I'm going to give that to you in just a moment, and then coming around the corner in about 10 minutes, going to have my NBC Sports content curator and distributor and college football insider Ben Cross is going to join me very shortly. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Morning, Joe, right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network, on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter every Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for joining me on a lovely Wednesday morning. Okay, so let's get into my top 5 NFL MVPs. Again, this is a very fluid list. It changes week by week, but I'm going off of purely what I've seen so far up until this point. Listen, at number 5, it's Ryan Tannehill. You can't deny this guy any longer. The type of season that he's been having right now, he's leading the Titans to a 5-1 record that's tied for 3rd best in the AFC, just behind the Steelers and the Chiefs. And this guy has been playing like an MVP candidate, over 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns, just 2 interceptions, tied for 2nd best in the NFL. He's got a top 4 QBR. And this team is top 5 in total offensive yards per game. So the Titans, this is a legitimate team. And I think the problem is it's hard to gloss over who he was when he was with Miami and the kind of negative impact that Adam Gase has had, because the telling stats right now, if you look at Ryan Tannehill in his 6 seasons with Miami, he threw 75 total interceptions through 6 seasons with Miami, averaging 12.5 interceptions a season. In the 2 seasons he's had with the Titans combined, he's thrown 8 total interceptions, 6 last year and just 2 so far this year. His best season with Miami, he threw 9 interceptions. In 2 seasons with the Titans, he's thrown a combined 8. He's playing extremely well. And the bottom line is, listen, they routed Buffalo with an impressive win, and they're 5-1. And this is a really impressive team atop the AFC South, and they're only going to get better and better, and they've got the recipe. And with Ryan Tannehill playing as confidently as he has been, the sky's the limit for this team, and he deserves to get credit, to be reckoned with. So Tannehill at number 5. Now at number 4, Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. I can't have him ahead of a couple other guys just because of the manner in which he lost to Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. But this is a guy in Aaron Rodgers who, again, first place in the NFC North with a record of 5-1. This guy has passed for over 1,600 yards this season, 17 touchdowns, and just 2 interceptions so far. Again, he's having a fantastic year holding on to the football. And that's the important thing when you talk about Aaron Rodgers is he's not turning the ball over anymore as much. Not that he was ever really doing it before, but he's taking care of the football. That's third most touchdowns in the NFL. He's got tied for the second fewest number of interceptions with 2 again with Ryan Tannehill. And their only loss is to Tom Brady and the Buccaneers. Now, they got shellacked in that game, but that's it. That's the only blemish on his season so far. So he's at number 4. At number 3, got to go with the GOAT, Tom Brady. Listen, it's hard to deny this guy any longer. The type of positive impact that he has had, it's so glaring, so noticeable right now with the Buccaneers. He has transformed this organization. He's absolutely transformed this organization. Everything that he's taken and collected with the Patriots, he's infused into this Buccaneers locker room. We saw a couple days ago, he chewed out his offensive line for committing too many turnovers, too many penalties. Okay, the last 2 games, not only has Brady had the highest QBR, 96.5 against the Packers 2 weeks ago, 88 against the Raiders. That's the highest 2-game stretch of QBR right now in the NFL. And since the game against the Bears, the Buccaneers only 0 turnovers in the last 2 games, only 4 penalties in the last 2 games. So they're playing extremely well. And Brady has thrown for over 1,900 yards. That's top 6 in the NFL so far. 18 touchdowns, second most in the NFL behind Russell Wilson's 22, and just 4 interceptions, which is still tied for top 10. So he is playing extremely well. He's turning back the clock. Yes, he's 43, but this guy is playing extremely well, not to mention coming off one of his best performances of the year against the Raiders, 33 of 45, 360 yards, 4 touchdowns, 73% completion percentage. So we can't deny him anymore. And this was a team, this was a Buccaneers team that had talent but couldn't win, to all of a sudden transformed into a Super Bowl contender. And that's all because of one guy. And he deserves to get some credit. And some people might have him even higher in the MVP conversation. I've got him at number 3. Now coming at number 2, listen, optics are important to me. And there's no one that screams optics better than Patrick Mahomes. This guy's number 2 in my rankings. What can't this guy do? When you really think about it, when you look at the optics and you say to yourself, what do your eyes tell you? Your eyes tell you this guy is amazing. Now, he's got a lot of talent to work with, which is why some people have lowered him on their MVP, polls. But the bottom line is this guy has been spectacular. A yard under 1,900 yards, completing 66% of his passes, 16 touchdowns, rather, just 1 interception, best in the NFL. 1 interception, 16 touchdowns. That's the best ratio in the NFL right now. 85 QBR, second best. He is fantastic. And this team is 5-1, or the 6-1 rather. And I mean, what more can you say about Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes? Second best record in the AFC. He's not forcing things anymore. They're top 10 offense in the league. And this guy has been spectacular. And I still take him, and I still take the Chiefs over anyone right now in the league because of him. And finally, we've got Mr. Russell Wilson, the former North Carolina State and Wisconsin guy. I love Russell Wilson. And given everything that he's asked to do, I'd be hard-pressed to put anyone ahead of him right now because they've got the best record in the NFC in 5-1. They're in the toughest division in the NFC West, and they're first in that division. This guy, 1,800 yards, nearly 1,900 yards, 22 touchdowns, the most touchdowns in the NFL, 6 interceptions. He's got a top 5 QBR in the league. And I gave this analogy before about a head chef. Russell Wilson is the ultimate head chefs. Normally, when you're at a restaurant, you've got sous chefs, you've got assistant chefs, you've got an expediter, you've got servers. He's had to be all of those. He's had to put on all of those hats. And when he's not, the service is poor. But when he's on, you're eating at a 5-star restaurant, and it's all because of this guy. Now, their only loss is that overtime loss to the Cardinals, in which he didn't play well, and he threw for 388 yards and 3 touchdowns. He did throw 3 interceptions, but that's a poor game for Russell Wilson. He does need to be more accurate in that spot, but that's the only blemish. That's his only quote-unquote bad game of the season. Now, not to mention, I think that narratives are so important. And you look at a guy like Russell Wilson, who's never won the MVP before. He's never even received a vote for MVP before. So narratives are really important. And when you have a guy who's been so special for so long and so many years, it's hard not to at least include him in the MVP discussion. And this year he has to be number one in my mind. So those are my top 5 MVPs so far. Again, watching Morning Joe right here in the Are You Serious Sports Network on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter every Monday and Wednesday morning from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Okay, now joining me, it's my pleasure to bring back on Ben Cross, NBC Sports' content curator and distributor and college football insider. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. Okay, so I asked you last week, the Big Ten is coming back. All right, they came back. There's excitement again. Everyone was thrilled to see the Big Ten. I'm going to jump into some specific teams, but obviously I have to start with Wisconsin. Now, the big news coming out of Madison, Graham Mertz, their highly touted number 1 ever quarterback recruit, who had perhaps the best rookie freshman debut for a quarterback, 20 of 21, 248, 5 touchdowns, only 1 incompletion, completed his first 17 passes. And now, Ben, he tests positive for COVID-19. This was a team that initially came into the season ranked number 14. The expectations were not super high, which is exactly how the Wisconsin Badgers like it. Then he has this tremendous performance. They jump up to number 9. He tests positive. What is the outlook in the immediate future for Wisconsin, and how tough of a blow is this for a team that, once we finally saw the guy we wanted to see, he lived up and exceeded the expectations for this Badgers team?
Well, you bring me on at an interesting time right now, Jonah. Obviously, as the news is breaking that the Wisconsin football team has paused all activities for the next 7 days. Paul Chryst has tested positive for COVID. 6 players, 6 coaches, and the game coming up against Nebraska is canceled. So the Graham Mertz situation could be an interesting one for Wisconsin, but it might not matter all that much, considering that they might miss the next few games. Now, they will reassess over the next 7 days and find out if they can go forward. They have a game against Purdue next Saturday that they've scheduled for 2:30 Central Time, and then the game the week following against Michigan will be interesting. And another thing to factor in here is, when were these tests administered? Because as from what we know now, that Graham Mertz's test was administered on Saturday. If that was the case, then he would theoretically be eligible for the game against Michigan. But we're not sure whether Paul Chryst and several other players and coaches were also tested on Saturday, whether Mertz was the first one to come back positive. So we'll certainly see. The timeline is very crucial here, but given the Big Ten's protocols, they all have to be out for 21 days, and any game that is canceled is not put in as a forfeit, is canceled and cannot be made up, will be put in as no contest. And of course, this hurts Wisconsin's chance to go to the Big Ten championship game. It hurts potentially Michigan's chance to go to the playoff, and obviously Wisconsin's chance to go to the playoff. So the development this week is obviously very big for Wisconsin, and it hurts their season in every way, shape, or form. Without Mertz, if you were to envision the scenario, we don't know who these other players are outside of Chase Wolf, the backup quarterback. Danny Vandenboom would be the quarterback right now. Danny Vandenboom has some tape. He doesn't have a lot. He was touted as a 3-star guy coming out of high school. His dad played for Wisconsin. He has a history there. He's a junior. He's been around the program. I don't necessarily know if it would be chaos on the field, but their run game would have to be a much bigger focus of their offense. Their defense played great against Illinois, but the offensive line and the run game wasn't necessarily spectacular, and they relied on Graham Mertz in third down and efficient situations to push the ball down the field. So Danny would absolutely have to be efficient on third down, and he would have to be a game manager and run the clock the way that Paul Chryst wants to, or whoever would step up in the interim. I would assume it would be Joe Rudolph. We'll certainly see, but I think if it were just Danny Van Boom at the helm and they were actually able to resume next week against Purdue, that they would be a slightly less efficient offense, and they would certainly need more of a spark from their run game than they got against Illinois.
So the interesting thing is, initially, when you looked at this team's schedule, you say, okay, we got Nebraska next week, Purdue in 2 weeks, and as you talked about, Michigan was the big one in 3 weeks. Now, I would almost argue that it's possible that even with a Danny Vandenboom, they could survive and float above water against perhaps Nebraska and Purdue. They could find some ways to win those games, and then it'd be the game against Michigan where they would need Graham Mertz. Now, if you look at the Pac-12, they've only got 6 games that they can play to try and make their case. How much do you think for a team like Wisconsin being in the Big Ten and having that conference respected the way that it is, how positive do you think that can be if, in fact, Wisconsin has to miss the Nebraska game and can only play 7 regular season games, or maybe even 6 now? How important is having the Big Ten status as a really deep, really talented conference that can kind of validate this Wisconsin Badgers team? How important is that for a program that, as you said, is now having to skip their game against Nebraska?
To be frank, I think this completely eliminates Wisconsin from playoff contention. I know if they are able to go up against Purdue and then they run the table, that's a 7 or 8 win team that would be undefeated with a win theoretically over Ohio State. That would give them a decent chance. But given their circumstance with their players and coaches being out, I'd say it's very unlikely that they're able to run the table and they're able to get in all these games. Right now, we're saying that 7 days from now, we'll reassess and see if they can play Purdue. I'd say there's a good chance that Purdue is in jeopardy too. I mean, we don't know if other players still have the possibility of testing positive. We don't know exactly which players are out. The only players we know that have tested positive are Mertz and Chase Wolf. We'll see if there are any other crucial players. It could very much affect them. I think the biggest concern for Wisconsin is just returning to the field of play. I think if you look at it, Ohio State has to be the caller for the Big Ten now and push forward to go undefeated and go to the playoff with the 8-game schedule and the additional game in the Big Ten championship. As far as Wisconsin's concerned, if they win out and win the Big Ten championship, including a game against Purdue next week, they give themselves a chance. But I would say it's slim to none that they'll even have that opportunity. And beyond that, losing this game, I think, definitely pushes them below a line where the committee was necessarily considering Big Ten teams at all. So I think you look at it, and Wisconsin would need to win out, to win convincingly, and then have teams continue to lose around the bubble, which teams are. You know, the SEC has been certainly very flaky in the Big 12 as well. So it's not necessarily as if there's any team waiting in the wings to overtake Wisconsin if they were to be undefeated. But I'd say it's much, much more unlikely that Wisconsin has a chance to get to the playoff with this cancellation and possibly another cancellation waiting in the wings.
So now the attention obviously turns to Ohio State. Now, it was always with Ohio State, and there was a lot of anticipation to see how this team would look. And listen, the first half, they were a little shaky against Nebraska. It's understandable. They haven't played a game. Second half, they blow them out, outscore them 28-3. Now, prior to this week, Ohio State was kind of always ranked top 5, top 6. To me, that was just a placeholder until the committee could finally actually see them play and justify them entering the top 3. In your mind, again, this is just one game, and I'm sure that they'll continue to improve and look sharper as the season progresses and goes on. But in your mind, did they look like a top 3 team that can compete with the likes of Alabama and the likes of Clemson?
I thought if you looked at their whole body of work, they absolutely did. Obviously, they did start slow, as you mentioned. The defense didn't necessarily look fantastic, and Fields, looked a little workmanlike, but nothing, Heisman contender-esque that we've seen from him in the past. So I think if you look at Ohio State, they didn't necessarily prove that they were a top 3 team, but they certainly showed times where they could be, and they'll have to show that more consistently as they go forward. They don't have that strong of a schedule. They do play Penn State this week that is coming off of a tough loss to Indiana. I think that hurts their resume and their reputation. That game is normally their calling card in why they are a top 3 team. But I think given where they are in the polls, the committee and the AP is already showing respect to them, and I think that bodes really well for them heading down the stretch, even with an 8-game schedule. I think this first week after the Big Ten returned to play was very crucial in the polls to see how they were going to view a team with 1 win as opposed to a team with 4 or 5. So I think this week certainly helped Ohio State. You were right. It seemed like the number 3 slot was just being held for them until they were actually able to play a game. Notre Dame hasn't looked like that great of a team, and no one outside of that top 3 or 4, maybe Georgia as they return this week against Kentucky, has a chance to squeak in. But beyond that, Ohio State definitely at least proved they're in that conversation. If they continue to win by that kind of a margin, I'd say Ohio State is very much in playoff contention and would be one of my favorites to go to the playoff.
So there were a couple shockers in the Big Ten, a couple more Big Ten questions, and we're going to shift gears a little bit. Indiana knocks off number 8 at the time, Penn State, in overtime, and Rutgers beat Michigan State. Which game were you more impressed by?
Well, I was definitely more surprised by the Indiana-Penn State result. I knew it was going to be a close game. I think the spread opened at 6.5. So it wasn't necessarily as if Penn State was this otherworldly opponent that was going to roll over Indiana. But it still surprised me that Indiana was able, even after going down and losing their lead late in that game, to come down, drive 80 yards down the field, score that touchdown, get the 2-point conversion, go to overtime, respond to Penn State, and then get that wild 2-point conversion to end the game. I thought that surprised me a lot more, because if you looked at that Rutgers-Michigan State matchup, Rutgers brings in Greg Schiano this offseason. They got a bunch of transfers from around college football, guys that were seemingly really impressive, and Michigan State couldn't be trending more in the other direction. Michigan State needs to now be considered one of the lower teams in the Big Ten. They are no longer the powerhouse they were with D'Antonio. They just don't have a history of recruiting success and guys that are currently there as well, experienced guys that can lead this team to where they expect to be. So I think you definitely need to lower the standard, the bar for what Michigan State football is, at least until they can start building something, and they haven't shown any indication of that. So I wasn't shocked that Rutgers came out and won that game. I guess I was a little surprised in how well they played, but I was definitely more surprised overall with the Indiana-Penn State result. I thought even without Micah Parsons that Penn State was going to find a way to win that game, and they nearly did. But with penalties and turnovers and the fact that they lost another running back to injury, they're certainly not looking like a top 10 team anymore. And I think Penn State needs to be worried about starting 0-2 when they host Ohio State this coming weekend.
All right, final Big Ten question. Michigan looked impressive against Minnesota, and to me, listen, Joe Milton, he was solid. He didn't, Jim Harbaugh didn't ask him to be too much. 15 of 22, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. But what impressed me about Michigan was their ability to run the football. They ran the football extremely well, like 256 yards on the ground. And to me, this was a must-win game if you're Michigan, not only because of all the scrutiny that Jim Harbaugh and this program has received since his arrival, but you never really got the sense that he was winning a lot of these big games at his time there. And you look at their schedule, Ben, in this truncated season, I mean, in 8 games, they've still got now at Indiana, which is going to be a difficult ranked game. They got versus Wisconsin, they got versus Penn State, and they have at Ohio State. Like, I felt like if they did not win this game against Minnesota, this could have spiraled really quickly into a terrible, terrible season. How important of a win was this for Jim Harbaugh and Michigan this year?
Well, you mentioned that schedule. It absolutely was a crucial win for them to get, and they won it with style points. Obviously, you mentioned he was on the ground, and they did give up a decent amount of points to a decent offense. I think this game said more about Minnesota's defense than it did Michigan's offense, because they're not going to be able to run the ball against like a team like Wisconsin or Ohio State or even Penn State. So I think Milton will have to win some games through the air. He has that arm. We haven't necessarily seen him prove it in years past and coming in his first real start and control of this team. So I think it was very crucial for Michigan to get that win, at least put themselves in contention, where if they can go on a miniature roll here, I know they went on a revenge tour a few years ago, if they can get that type of energy going and start to win some of these games. Wisconsin, the game with them is certainly in jeopardy. Don't know who's going to be available for them. Penn State looks like a much more winnable game. They still will most likely be favored against Indiana. So it'll always come down to that Ohio State game. If they can go on a miniature run and start to win some of those games, prepare themselves for Ohio State, then I think they have a very real shot. But this was, as you mentioned, a very crucial step to starting that. If they lose this game, you can forget about the rest of those games. Harbaugh is officially on the hot seat again, and they could have a disastrous season. Now, they still can, but it's more unlikely. They look more like a team that will be able to handle their business against potentially inferior opponents, which, if we're being honest with how Minnesota looked, they were absolutely an inferior opponent. Their defense lost a ton of guys, did not have the leadership they had last year, looked flimsy, and I think Minnesota will ultimately take a step back this year. But Michigan needed the win. It was still impressive on the road week one. You don't know how teams are going to come out. I was impressed with Michigan, and if they're able to keep that ground game going, they could very well compete for the Big Ten East.
All right, last two questions. Very quickly, Alabama loses Jalen Waddle to a broken ankle, which is just really unfortunate. You never want to see a really talented guy go down, regardless of your opinions of the football team. Listen, Alabama is still stacked. Devontae Smith is still there. Najee Harris is still there. There are plenty of freshman recruits that have come in that can take the load, that can share that burden. But listen, this was not only is this a projected first round pick in the NFL draft, might have been the best wide receiver in the nation. How big of a blow is this for Alabama and Nick Saban?
It's not necessarily a big blow in that they will not be able to pass the ball and they don't have a number one option to go to. You mentioned they have Devontae Smith, which a lot of people thought might be better than Judy anyway. Waddle. I personally thought that Waddle was the best on that team and the best receiver in the country. But losing him is devastating regardless. I do think they will be fine on offense. It's just very unfortunate when you look at a player of that stature. He was projected in the first round. I have no doubt he will still go in the first round. But you feel for him. You feel for the team. They won't necessarily lose much production in my mind. Mechie has stepped up as a great number 2 target in Waddle's absence, and they still have Smith and plenty of other receivers to come off the bench. So I'm not necessarily worried for Bama's offense, but certainly feel bad for Waddle. This hurts his stock a little bit, and you obviously hope he can come back as the same player. You never know with that kind of an injury. People can often come back a little hesitant to necessarily push or shift, which he'll need to do. I think the big thing for Jalen Waddle and his return will be the NFL Combine and his pro day. How well is he going to be able to cut? People will be watching him a lot more closely. So very unfortunate. Sorry for him, but I don't think this will affect Bama's outcome or prospectus all that much.
All right, and final question, Oklahoma State. All this controversy with Mike Gundy in the offseason, with his shirt remarks. We saw how outspoken Chuba Hubbard was. The fact of the matter, Ben, is Oklahoma State's 4-0. They're 6th in the country. They're the Big 12's best hope at having a team represent that conference in the college football playoff. How legitimate or not legitimate is this Oklahoma State Cowboys team?
They're legitimate. I don't think they're necessarily going to run the table, but I think they have that ability. I think they have to have a lot of things go right for them. It was a very impressive win over Iowa State. Iowa State has one of the best running backs, probably in the Big 12, if not the country, and also Brock Purdy and a very solid quarterback. Oklahoma State had to be the better team and do everything right in every facet to win that game. They have Texas coming up this weekend. I think Texas absolutely could beat them, but as I said, I think Oklahoma has the ability to run the table. And if they do, there's no question they're in the playoff. But I don't necessarily think I'm going to see that kind of production every single week. They still have to play Oklahoma. And as I mentioned, Texas coming up. They're not necessarily out of the woods. They still have a tough schedule. And I don't think they're going to navigate that without running into any landmines.
Well, that's always great work from from Ben Cross, always providing that great insight. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. NBC Sports' Ben Cross, content curator and distributor and college football insider. Ben, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining
Thanks
the
for
show.
having me, Jonah.
All right, Ben Cross. Love having him on. Final topic of the day, Malkin's moments. Got two great ones for you. First, Dez Bryant was signed onto the Baltimore Ravens practice squad. This guy has gone through a tumultuous journey that he's had to traverse. I mean, you look at this guy, a three-time Pro Bowler. 2016 was the first year that his production with the Cowboys kind of dropped. 2017, he's cut by the team. 2018, or rather 2017, he's cut by the team. Then he signs with the Saints in 2018. 2 days later, he tears his Achilles. He ruptures his Achilles. He has to miss the entire season, misses the entire 2019 season. And now this guy finally gets a chance to join the practice squad, and hopefully he can make the actual 50-something man roster. Really happy for Dez Bryant. He's been class personified throughout this entire process, and happy for him that he gets a chance to still play at age 32 and show the entire NFL and the world what he still has left in the tank. And finally, I mentioned this at the top of the show, my Malkin's moments. I have to talk about it. The Dodgers winning their first World Series since 1988, ending a 32-year drought, the seventh World Series for the Dodgers organization. And this 2020 just is capped off beautifully with the Lakers winning and now the Dodgers. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. You've been watching, listening to Morning Joe right here on the Are You Serious Sports Network, on Facebook Live, on Twitch TV, and on Twitter. Mondays and Wednesday mornings, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.